Modulation is the process in which the information signal is superimposed on the carrier signal, and one of the parameters of the carrier signal, like amplitude, phase, and frequency, it is varied according to the amplitude of the information signal. The information signal is a baseband signal. That is the electrical equivalent of the original sound signal. Suppose we have a sound signal like sound, music, picture, video, computer data. When this signal is converted into the electrical equivalent, that is called as a baseband signal. That is also called as an information signal. That is also called as a message signal. That is also called as a modulating signal. And this modulating signal is superimposed on the carrier signal. And when you superimpose the modulating signal on the carrier signal, we get a modulated wave. And in the modulated wave, one of the parameters of the carrier signal, including amplitude, frequency, and phase, is varied. Clear? So this is called as a modulation process. Now, when we have an analog wave, the amplitude modulation can be modulation, it is categorized as amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, and phase modulation. Out of that, amplitude modulation is the process in which the amplitude of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the information signal or message signal. See, here clear idea you will get. This is a message signal, jala ki apan modulating signal par manto. So this is a modulating signal or message signal or information signal, and this is a carrier signal. Carrier signal is a very high frequency signal. This is a low frequency signal, and here low frequency signal is shifted on the high frequency signal. So information signal, or that is called as a modulating signal, information signal, or that is also called as a modulating signal. Now this signal, it is superimposed on the high frequency carrier signal. This is a high frequency carrier signal. Its amplitude is EC. EC is the amplitude for the carrier signal. EM is the amplitude for modulating signal. Now when this wave is superimposed on this carrier signal, modulation occurs. When its amplitude modulation occurs, we get a wave of this type. Here you see the amplitude of this carrier signal is varied. This is your information signal, message signal. This is actually your message signal. And as the amplitude of this message signal varies like this, according to the variation in the amplitude of this information signal, the amplitude of the carrier signal is varied. See here. Here, this is a carrier signal having constant amplitude. Now, this is a time varying message signal which has changing amplitude. When modulation occurs, the amplitude of the modulated signal varies according to the amplitude of the information signal by keeping its frequency and phase constant. This process is known as amplitude modulation. So amplitude modulation is the process in which amplitude of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the modulating signal by keeping its frequency and phase constant. Means two parameters are constant. Frequency is constant, phase is constant. Only amplitude is varied according to the amplitude of the information signal. So this is envelope. EM is nothing but the amplitude of the modulating signal. EC is nothing but the amplitude of the carrier signal. Now when both are positive, means when we have a positive amplitude, EC plus EM occurs, we get an enhancement in the amplitude increases. And when this EM becomes negative, we have EC minus EM. So जेव्हा हे पॉझिटिव्ह हाफ सायकल असेल, ड्युरिंग पॉझिटिव्ह हाफ सायकल इथंपर्यंत अँप्लिट्यूड हा पॉझिटिव्ह आहे, विल हॅव EC प्लस EM ऍडिशन ऑफ द अँप्लिट्यूड. इथं म्हणजे इथं पॉझिटिव्ह आहे, इथं ऍडिशन होईल, EC कॅरियरच्या अँप्लिट्यूड मध्ये EMचा अँप्लिट्यूड ऍड होईल, इथंपर्यंत वेव्ह येईल. आता इथं काय होणार आहे, इथं निगेटिव्ह अँप्लिट्यूड आहे EM is negative here. So when this happens, there will be subtraction in the amplitude. Instead of addition, now subtraction. Now subtraction EC minus EM. So EC minus EM occurs up to this point, and we get a less amplitude at this point. Because why this happens? Because here we have a negative amplitude, and when we add negative quantity to the positive quantity, subtraction takes place. and we have a envelope of the amplitude modulated signal. This is the amplitude modulated signal, envelope of the amplitude modulated signal. Now इथं जर बघितलं तुम्ही, we get a maximum amplitude. At this point we are getting the maximum amplitude, and at this point we are getting the minimum amplitude. And here also we have written the maximum amplitude किती आहे मग EC plus EM. The maximum amplitude is EC plus EM, and minimum amplitude is EC minus EM. इथं दिले बघा, EC minus EM. So amplitude modulation is the process in which the amplitude of the carrier is varied according to the amplitude of the information signal by keeping its frequency and phase constant. So we have a message signal, we have a carrier signal, and when the message signal, that is a modulating signal, is superimposed here, we get the envelope of amplitude modulated signal. Then when we have a positive half cycle, when the amplitude of the cycle is a positive, both EC plus EM gets added, we get a maximum amplitude. Maximum amplitude. And when there is a negative amplitude of the modulating signal, it gets subtracted and we get a minimum amplitude. So maximum amplitude is EC plus EM, minimum amplitude is EC minus EM. Very simple. Now this is the one modulation process. Now the second modulation, again, which is very important, that is called as a frequency modulation. Same definition, slight change. Frequency modulation is the process in which frequency of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the modulating signal. Amplitude modulating signal चा महत्वाचा. तीनही गोष्टींमध्ये amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, phase modulation. Modulating signal चा फक्त amplitude आणि कॅरियरचा एकदा amplitude व्हॅरी झाला, amplitude modulation, frequency व्हॅरी झाली, frequency modulation, phase व्हॅरी झाला, phase modulation. पण कशासोबत? Amplitude of the carrier signal. So here, look here. So this is the message signal. This is the message signal. Now in the message signal we have this modulating signal. Then we have a high frequency carrier signal here. Now when this frequency modulation happens, there is a change in the frequency of the carrier signal according to the amplitude. Now during this half cycle, positive half cycle, there is no change because there was a positive amplitude. During the negative half cycle, म्हणजे इथून बघा आता, इथून खाली wave gets stretched. जेव्हा wave stretch होते, त्याची wavelength वाढते. When wave gets stretched, म्हणजे इथून इथपर्यंत जी एक सायकल आहे, म्हणजे याला आपण wavelength म्हणतो. इथून स्टार्ट केलं, half cycle, full cycle, हे wavelength असते एवढं. Now this is a wavelength. Now reciprocal of a wavelength is basically frequency. Now when wavelength increases, frequency decreases. There is a less frequency, there is a change in the frequency. जेव्हा नेक्स्ट पॉझिटिव्ह आलं, आता तुम्ही इथं सुद्धा क्लिअर आयडिया येईल तुम्हाला. इथे किती आहेत? 1 2 3 4 सायकल होतं. इथं आपण 4 घेतले, इथं परत कमी झाल्या, परत इथं जास्त वाढलेलं. म्हणजे when there is a positive amplitude of the modulating signal is a positive, the wave gets compressed, frequency increases. The wave gets compressed and frequency increases. When there is a negative amplitude, wave gets rarefied and we get less frequency. So there is a change in the frequency. Once it becomes maximum, then it becomes minimum, again it becomes minimum. So there is a variation in the frequency and the phase of the wave remains constant. Amplitude remains constant. Same thing about the amplitude. Here wave मध्ये amplitude was changing, frequency was constant. Here amplitude is a constant, frequency is a change. This modulation is called as a frequency modulation. So frequency modulation is the process in which the frequency of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the modulating signal. See, frequency modulation is the process in which the frequency of a carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the modulating signal by keeping amplitude and phase of carrier signal constant. So frequency of the carrier signal varies. इथं बघा तुम्हाला दिसतंय frequency modulated signal दिसते, colored, red colored. इथं frequency वाढली, इथं frequency कमी झाली, परत इथं वाढली, परत कमी झाली. So there is a variation in the frequency. पण त्याचा amplitude remains constant, amplitude remains constant, phase remains constant. हा जो अँगल असतो इथला, हा this remains constant. Phase change कसं असतं ते पुढच्या डायग्राम मध्ये कळेल तुम्हाला, phase modulation मध्ये. बघा इथं फेज चेंज कसा व्हायला लागला. फेज चेंज मध्ये असं असतं, अँप्लिट्यूड कॉन्स्टंट आहे, फ्रिक्वेन्सी ऑलमोस्ट कॉन्स्टंट आहे हे जे सायकल मध्ये, बट देयर इज अ चेंज इन द फेज. सो third is nothing but the phase modulation. Phase modulation is the process in which the phase of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the information signal by keeping amplitude and frequency of the carrier signal constant. Carrier च constant ठेवायचं, पण जो काही मॉड्युलेटिंग सिग्नलचा अँप्लिट्यूड आहे त्यासोबत कॅरियरचा फेज व्हॅरी करायचा, दॅट इज कॉल्ड एज अ फेज मॉड्युलेशन प्रोसेस. सो फेज मॉड्युलेशन इज द प्रोसेस इन विच the phase of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of the modulating signal by keeping amplitude and frequency of the carrier signal constant. Very simple. See, here we have a message signal. When we have a message signal, when it is a carrier signal, high frequency signal, and when the frequency modulation occurs, the nature is asha prakarcha astat. This not exactly like this, but there will be slight change also. But one of the pattern of frequency phase modulation, envelope of the phase modulation is shown in this figure. So this is the phase modulation process. So the analog modulation that can be categorized as here amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, phase modulation. Amplitude modulation is the process in which the amplitude of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of modulating signal by keeping frequency and phase constant, whereas the frequency modulation is the process in which the frequency of the carrier is varied according to the amplitude of modulating signal by keeping amplitude and frequency of the carrier signal, amplitude and phase of the carrier signal constant, whereas phase modulation, the phase of the carrier signal is varied according to the amplitude of modulating signal by keeping its frequency and amplitude constant. This process it is called as a phase modulation.